conversations, and law enforcement. This is Moses' People Speak.
Mr. Chamberlain, this is Candace Wade with Lifeguard Medical Alerts. This line is being recorded. You just received an activation from your pendant. Do you have an emergency? I'm not getting a response from you. I'm going to dispatch emergency services now.
White Plains Police. We're here for a welfare check.
Open this door! You're not coming into my home! Help me! Help me! I need help!
Hello, everyone. This is Terry Watson, another episode of Moses' People Speak. Again, I'm your host. Today, I am joined by three individuals. We did have four, but I'll talk about the fourth person in a second. But joining me today, David Midell. The intro I just shown was the film that he wrote and directed. And David, thank you for joining us, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Exactly. Next, we have Enrico Natale. Did I get that correct, man?
Enrico Natale, yeah.
Okay, I spent like a good 2-3 minutes before you log it in, repeating that to myself. Thank you for joining us too. I appreciate it. And down here to my right is Kenneth Chamberlain Jr. He is the son, also a community organizer. And man, thank you for joining us from New York.
Thank you.
All right, so I just showed the trailer of that film, and before we dive into the film, one thing I wanted to sort of just talk about first was the incident itself, because obviously the film is one thing, but this is based on a true story. So my first question really is, and Kenneth, if you don't mind, man, if you can recant the story, the incident, and maybe also what happened afterwards.
Well, on November 19th, 2011, my father inadvertently triggered his life aid pendant that he wore around his neck. He suffered from a heart condition and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And that is the reason why he actually had this pendant around his neck. That morning, when he triggered it, the company attempted to reach him and wasn't successful, so they contacted White Plains Police, who were first responders, and told them they were responding to a possible medical emergency. They arrived in my father's apartment complex in White Plains, 135 South Lexington, which is known as the Projects. They arrived there, they knocked on the door. My father actually came to the door, told them he was okay, didn't need him, and we would have thought that would have been the end of it. Unfortunately, such was not the case. The police then demanded that my father open the door, and my father refused to open the door because he knew he had not committed any crime or anything like that. Long story short, to kind of cut to the chase, for about 90 minutes, they would go back and forth with my father, yelling at him, screaming at him, mocking his military service. At one point, you hear my father say, "I'm telling you I'm okay." And excuse the expression, the officer says, "I don't give a fuck, nigga, open the door." Moments after that, they end up taking the door off its hinges. They fire electronic taser at him, beanbag shotgun 4 times, and then they shoot and kill him, alleging that he posed an imminent threat to life and well-being.
Wow. And this is really all captured on that film, that whole time period. And I know, Kenneth, you have been very active trying to take this incident and turn it around to make sure this doesn't happen again? And I know you have a coalition that you currently are with police, actually. Can you explain a little bit behind that decision?
So after the killing of my father, my biggest thing was I don't want another family to have to experience what I've experienced. I mean, you are totally lost when these things happen. You don't know what direction to go, who to turn to. Uh, you just have the media constantly trying to get in touch with you. They just want to ask you questions. You know, you don't know what you should say or what you shouldn't say. So a group of people did rally around me at that time. And these were a number of nonprofit organizations in White Plains that I used to work with before this incident happened. And so that was the forming or the creation of the Westchester Coalition for Police Reform. Now, our objective is we always tell people we're not anti-law enforcement. We're anti-individuals who feel they can do whatever they want to whomever they want.
Right.
So we will work with law enforcement. The funny thing is that, and maybe not so funny, is that we work with several different departments in Westchester County, but one department that will not work with us was the White Plains Police Department.
Wow.
You know, they would constantly say, there's pending litigation, or whatever their excuse was. They wouldn't even sit on panel discussions with myself. And I would always say, we don't have to talk about the killing of my father. There's so many other things that we can talk about. Let's make sure that there's no more Kenneth Chamberlain Seniors in White Plains. So we've done everything from know your rights, presentations, you know, what to do if you're stopped by law enforcement, or as we say, how to survive a law enforcement encounter. We do voter registration. I mean, you name it. Anything that has to do with trying to transition or trying to take this tragedy and make it into some type of positive, we try to do it. Because like I said, there's nothing that's going to happen or nothing that's going to take place that's going to bring my dad back. You know, so I'm just on this front line. I'm pushing, you know, trying to affect positive change.
And I appreciate everything that you do, of course. Now, again, making the film, and now, David, I want to ask, because I know that you reached out to Kenneth and asked to make this film. What was that decision? What was that process of making that, you know, say, hey, I want to make a film about Kenneth Chamberlain?
Sure. You know, I think it was sometime in 2016 or 2017. I was doing some research on cases of alleged institutional discrimination and police brutality in law enforcement. And, you know, many of the names that I was finding, I recognized. Laquan McDonald, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray. I recognized a lot of those names, but Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. was one of the names that I didn't recognize. You know, the more research that I did on what happened to Kenneth's father, the more it sort of resonated personally with me because of some of the experiences that I had had as an educator. I worked with students of many different age groups. I worked with adults. I worked with people with cognitive disabilities and emotional and behavioral challenges. And one of the things that you need to do working with that population is go through very extensive crisis management training. You have to learn how to respond to somebody who is experiencing a crisis in a way that keeps them safe, keeps you safe, and keeps everyone else around the situation safe. And while you know, what happened to Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. wasn't exactly the same, it wasn't in an educational setting, and you know, Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. Had a different set of challenges than maybe the students that I work with have or had. There was some crossover in that this clearly became a crisis situation. And it was very, very evident to me that these officers did not know how to respond in a way that kept everyone safe. So that was what really stuck out to me about it and really made it personal for me. And so I decided to reach out to Kenneth, and through the entire process, Kenneth has been really our most important and most valuable team member, on the core team of people who've been making this film. Kenneth has been by far the most valuable and important member of that team because of the perspective that he brings, the obvious, obviously deeply personal nature, that in the connection that he has with what happened and with Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. So we've worked together now for several years to realize this film, and a lot of what's on screen is because of what Kenneth has been able to bring to our team, and the perspectives that he's been able to provide to the actors, the crew, everyone involved.
And again, I want to transition to you, Enrico, because the as a producer and the editor as well, one thing that sort of stood out to me in that trailer was the emotional spike that this by watching that trailer, my emotions began to get the best of me, and I've watched that trailer a lot. Okay, so as someone who produced it, edited, and also co-starred it, you were actually the police officer. You played a police officer that actually used the racial slur, as I understand it, right?
No, I don't use in the film. I don't use the
right. Okay.
The police officer with the heart, the one that could have been tries to de-escalate the situation, tries to do the right thing. The rookie of the group.
Gotcha. So tell me, Enrico, as someone who was editing and producing this film, what were some of the emotions that I guess you felt in doing it, and also what was you trying to portray?
Well, some of the emotions. I mean, look, right from the very beginning, when I've known David for a really long time. We both went to the same college, and so I've always known that he's been a great filmmaker and stuff, and we've always tried to do something together. And he sent me the script for the Killing of Kenneth Chamberlain, and when I read it, I think we ended up meeting up like the next day, and I was just like, we're making this movie. We have to make this movie. This is such a powerful story. We have to get this. And then I met Kenneth, and everything just kind of, I think me, along with everyone else who worked on this, we understood the severity of the situation, of the story, of telling the story, of doing the story justice, of making sure that we give it everything we have to get this story out there and to do what we can. So, there was certainly a lot of emotions right from the very beginning. And then going into shooting, all of our cast took it very seriously. They all understood the words that they were saying, what this meant. And then going into editing, it was grueling. It was so grueling. And the film kind of it follows it almost in real time, the story. And as it goes on, and as it gets closer to when Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. is killed, it ramps up, and the energy and the suspense ramps up, and that feeling you got from the teaser is intensified like 20 times in the movie. I mean, it's just like, it just keeps building. And as David and I describe it, it's like you're pressing on the gas and you never let off. You just put your foot to the pedal and you just go. And you feel that energy. And what we try to do is just have the audience have an understanding of what it might feel like to be in that situation. And so, yeah, in the editing process, it was very emotional. I mean, I still cry to this day watching the movie. I mean, there's still scenes that make me tear up, and that make me, and I've literally seen this movie 1,000 times. I mean, I can't David and I know every single shot that comes in the movie, and it's still extremely powerful to me. And I think that speaks to the story, that speaks to what happened. And so, yeah, it was incredibly emotional and powerful throughout.
Wow, wow, and I one of the things that and I know that making a film is one thing, seeing the film is another, and then and Kenneth, maybe this question is redirected towards you because I know that you've been asked this question a lot, and that is when you see the film, one, how does that what does that do, I guess, to you and for you, and also what are you hoping people take away from seeing this film?
Well, looking at the film, pretty much to piggyback the same thing that Enrico has said is from the very beginning of the creation of the movie to where we are now, I've been with it every step of the way. And I've seen every take, every edit, and just like he said, it still invokes that same thing in you. The tears come, the emotion. Sometimes, like we did a private screening in White Plains. The first showing I watched, the second one I kept walking out because I need to be able to address the crowd or the audience afterwards. And I don't want to do it, where like I'm super emotional. But as much as you try not to be, it ends up happening. Or I'm looking at the audience, and for instance, I was watching my children as they were watching the movie for the first time, and I watched my youngest daughter jump up and run out of the theater. It's hard to take, but I always say, if nothing else, please know what not to do.
That's the point.
This is what you don't do. As a law enforcement officer, your job is to diffuse the situation, not create one. You had time, you had resources, and yet you chose to do it the way you wanted to do it. And the end result, your reckless behavior resulted in the death of a man.
And one thing too, and I really, when I think about what you just said, I spend a lot of time myself training law enforcement, and I always say that the most important thing for a police officer to understand is the generational trauma that exists between communities of color and law enforcement. And one thing that you just said just now was things not to do. If you could add to that, Kenneth, what is some of the things are you hoping that this would break? Like, what are some of the either behaviors or thoughts or anything that you think this film and this incident could help break?
Well, one of the things that I always point out with this is I talk about his Fourth Amendment rights to be protected against illegal search and seizure. We know that the 3 times that you can enter a person's home as a police officer, warrant, permission, exigent circumstances, they didn't have any of those things. And this is what I tell people, look at that. I said, my father, being a retired corrections officer, knowing the law, knew that he didn't do anything wrong. So I always tell people, if my father was guilty of anything in this situation, he was guilty of pissing off police. And that's what he did. And that's what created that situation. I also talk about how you interact with people when you say that they are known to you and you say that they have mental health issues. So yelling at somebody or cursing at somebody or mocking their military service, anything like that, you're not diffusing the situation. You're actually escalating it. And these are things that I need people to look at. You know, we can definitely use this film as a teaching tool, you know, of what, that's why I said of what not to do, you know, and this is how you handle it, you know. I had one other thought in my mind, but it kind of escaped me just now. If I remember it, I'll definitely come back to it.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
And I just to piggyback on what Kenneth is saying, you know, obviously these are very different circumstances than, you know, than the training that I had as an educator. You know, it's different being out in the community when you're a police officer than it is as a teacher in an educational setting. But many of the same principles, you know, that Kenneth was alluding to apply. You know, when you go through that crisis management training, you are taught what tone of voice to use, the type of body language that is going to de-escalate rather than escalate, what types of requests, or how to phrase your communication with the person who might be experiencing a crisis, or with anyone that you're speaking to, how to phrase your communication to them in a way that doesn't escalate the situation. What types of demands, if any demands, do you place on a person like that? Everything from tone of voice to body language to the actual words that you use. Proximity, personal space, obviously, is huge. You know, all of those things are really important concepts. And, you know, I always marvel at the fact that educators have to go through this type of training. Very, very extensive. You know, you have to, you go to a week-long course, you have to pass a test, you have to go to refresher courses every few months. And it really surprises me that if educators have to go through this type of extensive training, why isn't the same thing expected of police officers?
Well, and I think it's important to, you know, if you're talking about what will people take away from this, what we want them to take away from this, I think if you look at this situation and you look at what happened, you know, the first thing I want people to say is, well, we need to train people how to de-escalate a situation. We need the de-escalation tactics need to be something that is absolutely common ground in a first responder. And then we have to ask the question, who are the first responders in a medical situation? Who are the people that are going there first? And is it law enforcement? And if it is, then they should be trained in de-escalation tactics and an understanding that it is a medical crisis. It is not anything else. And they are not there for any other reason. And so I think that those are the two big things that I want people. And look, the beauty is that every time we've shown this in theaters, and every time we've shown this at festivals, it sparks conversation. People are talking. People want to talk about it. They want to understand. They want to figure out, well, what can we do? What is there to do in this? And I think that's exactly what we want. We want people to start talking about this. We want people to recognize that this is an issue that we as a country need to face.
No, that leads me to my good point, Enrico. I want to sort of just go back to you on this. What are some of the things you have heard people say about the to-dos after seeing this film? And then maybe we can go around that question.
Sure. Well, look, we premiered at Austin Film Festival, and we had someone on the panel at Austin saying that they've now implemented, and they just got funding, that when you call 911, there's an option for having a medical crisis. And when that's the case, they don't send law enforcement as first responders. They send people who are trained in de-escalation. And
you mean a mental health crisis?
Mental health crisis, sorry. And they have one officer there as a backup for them, just in case things get out of control in any way. But to me, that's a start. That's a good place to be. If someone's having a mental health crisis, they bring people there who are trained to de-escalate the situation and bring it down. And I think that that's a good start. But that's one of the things that I heard, and I'll let everyone else talk too. But that's one of the things that I heard that I got excited about. And I thought, okay, well that's progress in the right direction.
That is. How about you, David?
it's interesting because one of the impressions that I've gotten, there is absolutely conversation that is sparked, but many times I think the conversation ends up coming after after things have calmed down, because the emotions that people are experiencing, I think, when the film ends are so powerful. Many people are speechless. They're not really, they're still trying to catch because the film, as Enrico was mentioning, it's sort of, the film plays out as one large escalation that just keeps going. You press on the gas and you don't let off. And many people have honestly been speechless at the end of the film. They're so overtaken by their emotions in a good way, in a way that has really, really affected them. And later they can maybe come back and have a conversation about it. But I think many times it takes people some time to sort of calm the adrenaline down and kind of regain their bearings. But one of the most important things that this was actually from a woman who I think she was from Australia or New Zealand. She said that it really, really helped her understand racism in America in a way that she had not before. Which I because so often we most of the audiences that we've shown the film to have been people in America and people who've grown up in America and Americans. But it was really interesting to hear somebody's perspective who isn't from America, who, we know that there's discrimination everywhere, there's racism everywhere, but it was interesting to hear her say that this film really helped her understand racism in America on a level she had not before.
Wow, that's deep. Kenneth, same question for you, man.
Well, first let me say that the entire film itself is nothing short of powerful, and there's a part in this film that is like, I guess, the icing on the cake, for lack of a better word of saying it, that I think the people that are viewing it come to this realization that, oh my God, this actually happened. And to watch 200 plus people with tears in their eyes, quiet, who didn't know my father, speaks volumes. What most people will say to me afterwards, outside of, oh my God, or just giving me a hug because they don't know what to say. Right. The next question always is, where are we now with your father's case? Right. That is the question that's always asked. And
that was my my next question too, actually.
And when I tell them that we are still in the appeal process, we've been waiting 2 years on a decision now from the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. We do believe that we should win the appeal. I mean, the low-hanging fruit, again, is the Fourth Amendment, because the whole argument is, had you gone away, had you never taken down his door, had you never done any of those things, none of the other events would have happened. And maybe I might have met David and Enrico in a different setting, but this is usually what I get after people view the film.
Wow. And I wanted to now dive into that just a little bit, Kenneth. Because you're still working through this case. This has been a long process, to say the least. So, in your thought, what does justice look like for you?
That question has been asked, and I always go back to the Dred Scott decision when they say that a black man has no rights by which a white person is bound to respect. So I don't know what justice looks like. because I've never seen it. Justice, you know, I can always yell accountability. I can always say having these officers being held accountable, that's justice. I don't know. Let's just say tomorrow we get a decision that's in our favor and we're back in court and everything works out for my family and everything. I mean, is that truly justice? I don't know. Because nothing that's going to happen or take place is going to bring Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. back. So I guess if I have to say what does justice look like in a situation like this, is that God forbid if a situation like this should ever happen again, that there will be mechanisms in place that these prosecutors will look at all of the evidence in its totality. You won't start throwing things out and dismissing things. You'll put all of the evidence there and you will present it to a grand jury. And if the evidence suggests that there should be an indictment, that you will indict this officer and you will try this officer to the fullest extent of the law, and that will be justice. That will be what justice looks like. Is that these individuals who are committing these egregious acts are truly held accountable. And right now we don't see it. Every now and again you see something, or they'll say an officer was charged with murder in this. They were indicted in this. But one of the things that I always tell people, you have to watch what the DA is charging the officer with, because you cannot prove that an officer woke up and said, I'm going to kill somebody today. So to charge that officer with murder, which is the deliberate intent, you can't prove that. But you can prove reckless endangerment. You can prove criminally negligent homicide. You can prove those things. But a lot of times these DAs don't put that on the table. They say, we're going to charge you with second-degree murder, knowing that if you have a good attorney, you'll beat that.
Right. Wow. And he's not here today. I want to do a shout out to Damon Jones, my brother Damon Jones. He is active law enforcement, and he did get called in during his time. So stay safe, Damon. But I do want to talk about one thing that he has always said when we are meeting. Is one thing that people tend to do during these times is say officers need more training. But sometimes it's time to hold the officer to the training they currently have right now. And so with that said, I guess my question to follow up with is, this obviously sparks some conversation. But how do we continue this conversation without having to have an incident? Because, with the film, you get people in a room, they get to see it from this perspective. But this is nothing new. And I think one of the things, especially in Westchester County, there has been other incidents like this. So how do we spark this conversation without the need of having an incident? And this could be for anyone on this today.
Well, I guess I can first say that the one of the things that you do is you have to foster these relationships. You need progressive law enforcement. So you need, for instance, I'll give you a perfect example. I've worked with the town village of Greenburgh with their chief at that time. One of the questions that I usually ask officers in leadership positions, chiefs, captains, and things like that is, do you believe that racism exists in your city or in your town? Do you believe that it exists in your department? I had one department tell me no. And I bet you can guess what department that was. Yes, it was the White Plains Police Department. They looked me right in my face and said no. The Greenburgh chief of police said yes. It exists in our town, and I know that it exists in my department. But if I catch wind of it, if I hear about it, if I catch any of my officers doing it, trust me, they will be held accountable for it. That tells me I can work with you.
Right, right.
So you have to be able to come together and understand or address the elephant in the room. Don't say that these things are isolated incidents and that they're not happening, or they're not happening as much as we would lead you to believe. Or then the argument is, well, white people are shot and killed at a much higher rate than black people by police officers. And I said, yeah, but there's a difference when you're 60-something% of the population, or when you're only 17% of the population, and yet you're 2.5 times more likely to be shot and killed. That is what the issue is. And we cannot, exclude these biases, that you automatic that they have when they're on these departments. So, and I'm not just talking about a white officer. I'm talking about black officers too, because that bias is there. You approach certain situations different. My father lived in what's considered a low-income neighborhood. Would you have gone to a more affluent neighborhood and said, and if the person said leave, would you have stayed, or would you have just said sorry to have disturbed you and going on about your business?
Wow. Yeah. That's a good pop-up. David, yeah.
I think that you mentioned how do you continue this conversation without having another incident potentially. Our hope is that a film like this can continue that conversation, because that I think that's one of the things that films or books, media can do. They can serve as a reminder of the terrible price that's paid when things like this happen. And and our hope is that the film does that. And I think that the conversations that we have had after this film have been really substantive. Like I mentioned, after people are able to kind of catch their breath and calm down a little bit, the conversations that we've had have been really substantive. And one of the, piggybacking on what Kenneth was mentioning, one of the interesting things that I've done over the past couple of years that I would encourage everybody to do this at some point is to just go to YouTube and you just type in police recruitment video, those three words, and you'll have several. There are many departments that use these types of videos to attract new applicants and those kinds of things. And it's very interesting because there are some departments who seem to be advertising their jobs in the police department. They seem to be advertising the more community building bridges, communication, the more sort of altruistic aspects of being a member of law enforcement. And there are other departments who their recruitment videos look like Call of Duty commercials, or they look like action movies. They show the armored car pulling up to the building. They show the SWAT team getting out, kicking the door in with their rifles pointed all in every direction. And I think questions need to be asked about: are police departments in the habit of recruiting the right types of people with the right types of personality traits? Because you could ask yourself, what personality traits is a person going to have if they're attracted to a recruitment video that looks like a Call of Duty commercial? And that's, I realize that that's a generalization. I know you can't necessarily, you can't necessarily put everybody into a box like that. I know that I'm making a generalization right there, but I think questions really should be asked about recruitment practices that these police departments are using, and what aspects of the jobs are they really advertising when they're trying to recruit people.
Yeah, that's a good point. Rico?
It's a good point. And look, I think when you say like what can people do, like how can we all, and I think not everyone's a Kenneth Chamberlain Jr. And what I mean by that is he's an incredible speaker. He's got a way of talking about the subject that makes you want to listen, that makes you want to be heard. And I think the average person who's what our objective was for this movie is you can watch this movie, get so impassioned, feel the energy, feel what happened to this man, and understand something needs to happen. And I think the buzz, the idea of like talking about this will force matters. And that's what I want to happen, is I want people, if a collective group of people decide that something is wrong with this issue, they will be forced to discuss it. They will be forced to consider new options and talk about this. And that's what I think the general population of America can do is, for us, if you watch a movie like ours and you understand and feel that intense emotion that you're feeling, and then decide this isn't right, nobody should go through this, nobody should feel this, and collectively raise our voices and say something needs to happen. And then you have figures like Kenneth out there speaking for the masses. I think that's what I would love to happen for this, and that's what I'm hopeful will happen, because sometimes, and I think it's all too common, people feel like, well, I can't really do anything. Well, yes, you can do something. You can raise your voice and you can say something about this, and you can follow people who are have a prominent voice in this world, like Kenneth, and you can support them and support this movement and hope that something will happen. And I think if enough Americans believe in this and enough people do this, something will happen.
That's a good point. And I do have a last question. Before I get to the last question, I do want to ask that question to Kenneth first. Is going for what Enrico just said. What can people do now to support you, the family, the movement, or whatever? What can people do to provide support?
Well, right now, I would say, even locally, even if you're not living in Westchester, one of the things that I've always asked is that people can go to my Facebook page, Kenneth Chamberlain Jr. or Justice for Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. The information that I have on those pages, share it out, send it to other people, because I've done speaking engagements where I've said, how many people, show of hands, know about the killing of Kenneth Chamberlain Sr.? And sometimes you can have, let's just say you have 50 people in the room. If 2 people raise their hands, I'm surprised, because a lot of people don't know. I've even had people say that even about this film that were at the festival. They said, I never knew this happened.
Wow.
So you have to get this information out there. You have to talk about it. You have to address the elephant in the room, not just around the killing of my father, but even incidents that you may have locally where you live at, because they all tie in together. Because if we can stop it one place, if we can get laws in place, let's say where you live, maybe we can take those same laws and apply them here. So it's going to take this collective work throughout the nation in order to really help each other.
That's a really powerful point, Kenneth. And one thing that I know for a fact is, in my local community, this is going to be a highly watched show, just because we also experienced a very similar case here in Centre County. And so that's really good advice, and I thank you for sharing that. So my last question for every show, and it's to everyone that's all 3 of you, is what do you want to, what is your goal for law enforcement and community of color's relationship? What is your goal, and what would you like to see happen? Kenneth, we can start with you. Or better yet, Kenneth, let's give you the last word. David, let's start with you.
I think given my background in you know, the experiences that I've had going through those training seminars and those kinds of things, I would say that the aspect of it that I would like to see is more awareness and training for police officers, and you know, I would like to see police officers exercising more basic compassion and empathy, because you know, those are really, you know, hand in hand. If you exercise, you know, the most basic human compassion and empathy, you're not going to scream at them. You're not going to call them the N-word. You're not going to break down their door and tase them and shoot them with beanbags. You know, so I think that those really sort of go hand in hand. And it just, you know, I keep coming back to the point that, you know, I've been involved in crisis situations in educational settings. And again, I know that those are different than crisis situations out in the community, but there is some overlap with the principles. I've seen those types of situations get resolved smoothly and safely, where everyone is respected and everyone remains safe and everyone remains, you know, everyone maintains their dignity. And I've also seen those situations escalate and devolve and go horribly wrong. And, you know, it happens, as Kenneth was mentioning, it happens more often in communities of color. It happens more often in lower income areas. It happens with people who struggle with mental health issues or cognitive challenges. People with autism many times are at an increased risk of being injured or killed by police officers for the same, you know, similar. The police don't understand their behavior, and they're not utilizing the necessary compassion and empathy. So that's really what I would like to see more than anything else.
Thank you, David. How about you, Enrico?
I'm in very much in agreement with David. Compassion. I think the whole world needs a little bit more compassion in general. I think we need to be a little bit more empathetic towards each other, but especially people in law enforcement. Abuse of power. You know, understanding that we're all in this together, and you know, I think we need to support each other. And I'd like to see, and there's been many discussions about this, law enforcement working in the same community that they live. I think that would be a pretty great thing, and I think that's something that's important. You know, understand your own community, and you work within your own community, because you know, I think that would help a lot. The kind of pack mentality, understanding how we get rid of that. And that, look, that's in every job, every type of job situation. There's a pack mentality. My wife's a nurse, and she would tell me all the time that when she first started, you know, the nurses who were there for 30 years would tell her to take the hardest patients. And I'd be like, are you kidding me? Like they need the most help, and you're going to give it to the person who has the least experience. Like, that's not okay for the patient. And so I think it happens in a lot of different fields, but especially in the law enforcement, there is a pack mentality of, even if you have a bad, you know, if you understand that what's going on is not right, how do you go up against your brothers and you say, hey, stop doing this? It's this pack mentality that I think we need to try to somehow get rid of. So those are the things that I think, you know, I would love to see, but absolutely starting with compassion. I just feel like we all need a little bit more of that.
Thank you, Enrico. Last but not least, Kenneth.
So I think that, you know, we can all agree on compassion, but one thing that I always say, you know, we are so busy sometimes looking at what separates us as opposed to what brings us together. And a lot of the times I will go to, or I have conversations, and I've talked about the three major religions in this world. We've talked about Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And I said, you know, in Judaism, you've heard, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. In Islam, you've heard, none of you truly believes until you want for your brother and sister that which you want for yourself. In Christianity, we've heard, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's the same thing. It's just said different ways.
Right.
So the name of the game is equality, being equal in all aspects of life. And yes, having officers living in the neighborhoods that they patrol would be a great thing. We talk about mental health, how they deal with individuals who have mental health issues, but let's talk about the officers' mental health as well, because we don't know what they have experienced themselves being on the job. So, and I understand that. So these are the type of changes that I want to see, and have real prosecutors committed who are more about purpose and not position, you know, and we can truly affect some type of change out here.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. So I want to thank you, David Midell. Again, you can find David at David Midell on Twitter, Enrico at Enrico Filmmaker, and Kenneth. Kenneth, you know what? I want to take the time, and I'm going to post the Facebook page as well as the website with this the show and the advertisement of the show. But on Twitter, even though I know Kenneth is not a Twitter person, but son of a Marine 412. So that concludes this episode of Moses' People Speak. And everyone, remember to speak power through truth. Everyone have a great, great night.